Maria's hands trembled as she reached into her cleaning cart, pulling out a small bottle of bubble solution she kept for her own daughter. The little girl in the corner was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face, completely alone in the sterile hospital hallway. Without hesitation, Maria knelt down and began blowing gentle bubbles, watching as the child's panicked breathing slowly steadied with each floating sphere. What Maria didn't know was that behind the tinted glass of the adjacent room, one of the world's most powerful women was watching every compassionate gesture, about to change both their lives forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of unexpected kindness and life-changing moments, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. The fluorescent lights of Children's Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the polished floors, as Maria Gonzalez pushed her cleaning cart down the pediatric wing. It was nearly midnight, and the hallways that bustled with activity during the day now held an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant hum of machines and the occasional footstep of a night nurse. Maria had been working this shift for 3 years, ever since her husband Carlos had been killed in a construction accident, leaving her to raise their 7-year-old daughter Sofia alone. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, a faded blue that had once been vibrant, hung loosely on her small frame. The weight she'd lost since Carlos's death wasn't from any intentional diet, but from the stress of working 2 jobs and the constant worry about making ends meet. Despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones, Maria took pride in her work. She knew that in a children's hospital, cleanliness wasn't just about appearance, it was about life and death. It was the unmistakable sob of a child in distress, raw and desperate in a way that only comes from pure terror. She followed the sound until she found its source. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, huddled in the corner where 2 hallways met. The child was wearing a hospital gown that was far too big for her tiny frame, and her blonde hair was matted with tears and sweat. Her blue eyes were wide with fear, darting around frantically as if looking for an escape from some invisible threat. Maria had seen enough frightened children in this hospital to recognize the signs of a full-blown panic attack. Without thinking, Maria abandoned her cleaning cart and approached slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. She had learned from Sofia that sudden movements could startle scared children even more. The little girl looked up at Maria with those terrified blue eyes, and something in Maria's chest broke open. That's when Maria remembered the small bottle of bubble solution she kept in her cleaning cart. A little indulgence she'd purchased for Sofia, but carried with her like a talisman of hope during her darkest nights at work. Maria retrieved the bottle and unscrewed the cap, dipping the plastic wand into the soapy solution. She began to blow gentle bubbles, each one catching the harsh hospital light and transforming it into something magical. The bubbles floated through the air like tiny planets, some popping immediately while others drifted lazily toward the ceiling. Her small hand reached out tentatively to touch one, and when it popped against her finger, the ghost of a smile flickered across her tear-stained face. Victoria was a woman whose name appeared regularly in Forbes magazine, whose decisions affected thousands of employees across her global empire of tech companies. She was worth over $2 billion, and her time was typically scheduled in 15-minute increments by a team of assistants. But right now, none of that mattered. Victoria was watching a hospital janitor show more compassion to her daughter Emma in 5 minutes than most people had shown in their entire lives. Victoria had been in back-to-back emergency meetings with Emma's medical team when her 5-year-old daughter had apparently wandered away from her private room. Emma had been in the hospital for 2 weeks now, undergoing a series of complex heart surgeries that would determine whether she lived or died. The stress of the situation had triggered severe anxiety attacks in the little girl, and the medical staff struggled to help her cope with the fear and confusion. Despite Victoria's wealth and access to the world's best medical care, there were no guarantees. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, but Emma's emotional state had been deteriorating with each passing day. She barely spoke anymore, flinched when nurses approached, and had nightmares that left her screaming in terror. Nothing seemed to break through the wall of fear that had built up around her daughter. And now, watching through the glass, Victoria saw Emma actually smiling for the first time in weeks. She didn't try to force conversation or physical contact. She simply created beauty in that sterile hallway, transforming it into a place where a frightened child could find a moment of peace. It was the first word she'd spoken in 3 days. Gradually, Emma's breathing returned to normal, and the tension in her small body began to ease. She had spent millions on the best medical care money could buy, but she couldn't purchase what this stranger was freely giving her daughter. Simple human kindness, without expectation of reward. When Emma finally fell asleep, curled up on the small bench in the hallway with her head resting against Maria's leg, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She stepped out of the room and approached Maria quietly. Maria looked up, startled. She had been so focused on Emma that she hadn't noticed the elegantly dressed woman who had emerged from the nearby room. Victoria was tall and blonde, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Maria made in 6 months. Her makeup was perfectly applied despite the late hour, and her jewelry caught the light with subtle sophistication. "Please don't apologize. I'm Emma's mother, Victoria Sterling, and I want to thank you for what you just did." She had likely broken several hospital protocols by spending so much time with Emma. "I've been trying to help her cope with her fear for weeks. Teams of specialists couldn't do what you just accomplished with a bottle of bubbles and genuine kindness. Maria Gonzalez." Victoria handed her a business card, but not one of her corporate cards. This one simply had her personal phone number written in elegant script. Victoria arrived precisely on time, dressed more casually than the night before, but still radiating the kind of confidence that came with never having to worry about money. Victoria learned that Maria was widowed, working 2 jobs to support her daughter Sophia, and struggling to keep up with rent on their small apartment. Maria learned that despite Victoria's wealth, she was also essentially a single mother. Emma's father had left when the extent of her heart condition became clear, unable to handle the stress and uncertainty. "And I want you to know that there are no strings attached. If you say no, nothing changes. Emma will still receive the same excellent care, and your job at the hospital is secure. I'd like to offer you a position with my family," Victoria continued, "not as a maid or a traditional employee, but as Emma's companion. Someone who can be with her during her treatments, help her cope with the medical procedures, and provide the kind of emotional support that seems to come naturally to you. I don't have any formal training in childcare or..." "The salary would be 5 times what you're making now at both your jobs combined, plus full health insurance for you and Sophia. And Emma's medical care has given me connections to excellent pediatric services if Sophia ever needs them. It would solve every financial worry that kept her awake at night, ensure Sophia could stay in her school, and provide security she had never dared to dream about. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something focused on supporting families dealing with pediatric medical crises, the kind of families who can't afford the level of care Emma receives. I'd like you to help me develop it, bring the perspective of someone who understands what it's like to navigate the system without unlimited resources." But when she picked up Sophia from school that day and saw her daughter's worn shoes with holes beginning to show, when she calculated how many more months she could afford their rent, when she thought about Emma's frightened blue eyes finding peace through something as simple as bubbles, she knew what her answer would be. Maria wanted to leave properly, training her replacement and ensuring that the children's wing would continue to be cleaned with the same care she had always provided. At 7 years old, she had developed a cautious relationship with good news, having learned that life could snatch away happiness without warning. But when she met Emma for the first time, something magical happened. Emma had been having a particularly difficult day, facing another surgical consultation that had left her withdrawn and anxious. Maria had brought Sophia to the hospital so the 2 girls could meet, hoping that Emma might find some comfort in another child's presence. Sophia took one look at Emma's scared expression and immediately sat down beside her hospital bed. "My mama says you like bubbles," Sophia said simply. "I brought you some special ones." These were the kind that glowed in the dark, a special treat Sophia had been saving for a special occasion. She had decided that meeting Emma qualified as special enough. Emma began to laugh, not the polite, careful laughter she sometimes managed for adults, but the genuine, uninhibited giggles of a child at play. Sophia, despite having lived through loss and uncertainty that would challenge many adults, had retained the magical ability of children to live fully in the present moment. Victoria watched from the doorway, and Maria stood beside her, both women recognizing that they were witnessing something precious. Their daughters, despite the vast differences in their circumstances, had found an immediate connection based on nothing more complicated than the joy of shared play. "Thank you," Victoria whispered to Maria, "for bringing light back into her world." She wasn't just Emma's companion. She became her advocate, her comfort during medical procedures. and her bridge between the adult world of medical decisions and the child's world of fear and confusion. Maria learned to read Emma's moods, to recognize the early signs of anxiety attacks, and to intervene with techniques that had nothing to do with medical training and everything to do with intuitive understanding. Sometimes it was bubbles, sometimes it was singing Spanish lullabies that Emma didn't understand but found soothing, and sometimes it was simply sitting quietly and holding Emma's hand while she cried. Her stress levels decreased significantly, which improved her body's ability to heal from surgeries. She began sleeping better, eating more consistently, and cooperating with medical procedures instead of fighting them with panicked resistance. Patricia Wells, Emma's lead cardiologist, was amazed by the transformation. In 30 years of pediatric medicine, she told Victoria during one of their regular consultations, "I've never seen such a dramatic improvement in a child's emotional state translate so directly to physical healing. Whatever Maria is doing, it's working better than any medication we could prescribe." Victoria had been surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Business deals, investments, favors, access. Maria wanted nothing except to do right by Emma and to provide for her own daughter. It was a refreshing honesty that Victoria hadn't experienced since her own childhood. Sophia, meanwhile, thrived in ways that broke Maria's heart with gratitude. The private school that Victoria arranged for her was challenging but supportive, recognizing Sophia's intelligence while providing resources Maria never could have afforded. Sophia began taking violin lessons, joined the school's science club, and for the first time since her father's death, talked about her dreams for the future with excitement rather than resignation. The foundation Victoria had mentioned became a reality, with Maria playing a crucial role in its development. They called it Hearts and Hope, and it provided financial support, emotional resources, and practical assistance to families facing pediatric medical crises. Maria's insights shaped every aspect of the Foundation's approach, from the application process designed to minimize bureaucratic stress to the support groups that paired families with others who had navigated similar challenges. One evening, about 6 months after that first night in the hospital hallway, Maria found herself in Victoria's penthouse apartment, helping Emma with her bedtime routine. Emma's latest surgery had been successful, and while she still faced months of recovery, the doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis. "Maria," Emma said softly, "are you going to stay with us forever?" Emma would eventually recover fully, would start school, would need less intensive emotional support. What would happen to this unusual arrangement then? It was a view that Maria was still getting used to, so different from the cramped apartment where she and Sophia had lived for the past 3 years. "What did you tell her?" "Before Emma got sick, I measured success in stock prices and market share. Now I measure it in children's smiles and families staying together during impossible times. I never imagined this life. Sometimes I worry I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream. Emma is alive and thriving because you saw her fear and responded with your whole heart. That night in the hallway, you saved her in ways that surgery never could. Her heart was strong, her scars were fading, and she was preparing to start kindergarten at the same private school Sophia attended. The two girls had become inseparable sisters in everything but blood, and their friendship had taught both families lessons about love that transcended economic circumstances. Sophia had blossomed into a confident, articulate 8-year-old who spoke passionately about her dreams of becoming a doctor, specializing in pediatric cardiology. She wanted to help scared children the way Maria had helped Emma, but with medical knowledge to complement the emotional support. The Hearts and Hope Foundation had grown into a significant organization, helping hundreds of families and partnering with hospitals across the country. Maria had become its director of family services, traveling to conferences and sharing her insights with medical professionals who were learning to see pediatric care through the lens of whole family support. The ruthless businesswoman who had once prioritized profit above all else had evolved into someone who understood that true success was measured in human connections and positive impact. She still ran her companies, but she did so with a different philosophy, one that prioritized employee well-being and corporate social responsibility. She was there with a group of Hearts and Hope volunteers, training hospital staff on family-centered care approaches. As she walked past the spot where she had first met Emma, she remembered that terrified little girl and the moment that had changed everything. Sophia called out, and Maria turned to see her daughter demonstrating the bubble technique to a new young volunteer. Sophia had become an unofficial ambassador for the foundation, her natural empathy and understanding of loss making her uniquely effective at connecting with frightened children. Emma ran up to join them, her energy and enthusiasm a testament to her complete recovery. She was wearing a small volunteer badge that Victoria had specially made for her, and she took her role as a junior helper very seriously. Emma asked Sophia, holding up her own bottle of bubbles. Maria watched her daughters, because that's what they had become, both of them hers in the ways that mattered most, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had led them all to this moment. It had started with tragedy, with loss that seemed insurmountable. But it had evolved into something beautiful, something that honored Carlos's memory by ensuring his death had led to life-changing help for other families. Victoria joined Maria in the hallway, and together they watched their daughters work with volunteer coordinators to set up supplies for the evening's activities. Maria considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other somehow," she said finally. "Emma needed what I could give her, and I needed what you offered my family. Sometimes I think the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right moment. Not just medically safe, but emotionally safe. She knows she's surrounded by people who will catch her if she falls." It hadn't been without challenges. Adjusting to a new social class, learning to navigate Victoria's world while staying true to her own values, helping Sophia understand that accepting help didn't diminish their independence. But every challenge had been worth it for moments like these. Sophia reading a bedtime story to Emma in both English and Spanish, Emma teaching Sophia a card game she'd learned from another child at the hospital, both girls planning their next bubble-making adventure with the scientific precision that only children could bring to such projects. It was a simple tale, but one that both girls requested regularly, finding comfort in its familiar rhythm and hopeful message. Victoria had heard this story dozens of times, but she never seemed to tire of it. Perhaps because it was really their story, the story of how a moment of compassion had transformed 4 lives in ways none of them could have imagined. "Once upon a time," Maria began, "there was a little bottle of bubbles that held a very special kind of magic." As she spoke, Maria realized that she was no longer just telling a story to help children sleep peacefully. She was sharing a testament to the truth that small acts of love could ripple outward in ways that changed the world. When both girls had finally drifted off to sleep, Maria and Victoria sat together in the quiet house, each lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. "For trusting a janitor with your daughter's heart. For giving Sophia and me a chance at a life we never dared to dream about." They had found in each other not just practical solutions to their individual challenges, but genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual respect. But inside this house, 4 lives had found their rhythm together, creating a family bound not by blood, but by choice, love, and the recognition that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of kindness. As Maria prepared for bed that night, she looked in on both girls one more time. Sophia was curled up with the stuffed elephant that had been her comfort object since Carlos's death, while Emma slept peacefully clutching a small bottle of bubbles that she insisted on keeping by her bedside, as a reminder that magic was always within reach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help other families through the Hearts and Hope Foundation, new moments of joy and growth for both girls. But tonight, Maria allowed herself to simply feel grateful for the mysterious way that one moment of compassion in a hospital hallway had led to this beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect family they had created together. She thought about Carlos, about what he would think of the life she and Sophia had built from the ashes of their loss. She believed he would be proud, not of the financial security or the beautiful home, but of the way they had turned their pain into purpose, their struggle into strength that they now shared with others facing similar challenges. The real magic had been in the choice to see past differences in class and circumstance to recognize the fundamental human needs that connected them all. The need to love and be loved, to feel safe and valued, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. As Maria finally settled into sleep, she smiled at the memory of that first night, when she had knelt on a hospital floor and blown bubbles for a frightened child, never imagining that those simple floating spheres would become the foundation for a life more beautiful than any fairy tale she could have invented. What started as a simple idea to help families facing pediatric medical crises had evolved into a comprehensive support network that addressed not just financial needs, but emotional, educational, and social challenges as well. She now traveled across the country, speaking at medical conferences and training hospital staff on the principles of family-centered care. Her presentation, titled "The Bubble Effect: How Small Acts of Compassion Create Ripples of Healing," had become one of the most requested talks in pediatric healthcare circles. Medical professionals who had initially been skeptical of input from someone without formal training quickly discovered that Maria's insights, born from lived experience and intuitive understanding, filled crucial gaps in their clinical knowledge. Patricia Wells had become one of Maria's strongest advocates in the medical community. During a recent conference in Chicago, she had introduced Maria by saying, "I've been practicing pediatric cardiology for 3 decades, and I thought I understood everything about healing children's hearts." Maria Gonzalez taught me that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes in the form of bubbles and unconditional compassion. They now had partnerships with over 50 hospitals across 15 states, and their family support program had helped more than 2,000 families navigate medical crises. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real impact of their work. There was the Martinez family in Phoenix, whose 4-year-old son had been diagnosed with leukemia. The foundation didn't just provide financial assistance for treatment. They connected the family with other parents who had walked the same path, arranged for sibling care during long hospital stays, and ensured that the older children didn't fall behind in school while their parents focused on their sick brother. The foundation's support had extended beyond medical bills to include trauma counseling for the entire family, temporary housing near the hospital, and even grief support when one of the twins didn't survive her injuries. Each family's story became part of Maria's growing understanding of how medical crises affected entire family systems. She had learned to see patterns that weren't visible to medical professionals focused primarily on treating the patient. She understood how financial stress could exacerbate a child's anxiety, how parental fear could interfere with a child's willingness to cooperate with treatment, and how siblings often became invisible casualties of family medical crises. The cutthroat business executive who had once fired employees via email had become a leader who prioritized human connection and employee well-being. Her companies had implemented groundbreaking family support policies, including paid medical leave for employees dealing with family health crises, on-site childcare facilities, and partnerships with local hospitals to provide employee families with access to top-tier pediatric care. These changes hadn't hurt her bottom line. Quite the opposite. Employee retention had improved dramatically, productivity had increased, and Victoria's companies had been recognized as industry leaders in corporate social responsibility. She had discovered that treating employees as whole human beings rather than interchangeable resources actually improved business outcomes in measurable ways. They weren't employer and employee, though Maria received a substantial salary. They weren't traditional friends, given the complexity of their interdependence. They had become something unique, a chosen family bound together by shared purpose and mutual transformation. Sophia and Emma, now 9 and 7 respectively, had grown into remarkable young women whose friendship continued to be the heart of both families. Sophia's academic excellence had earned her a scholarship to an exclusive summer program for gifted students, where she would spend 6 weeks studying advanced mathematics and science. Her dream of becoming a pediatric cardiologist remained strong, and she often accompanied Maria and Victoria to foundation events, where her ability to connect with frightened children had become legendary among the staff. Emma had not only recovered completely from her heart condition, but had channeled her experience into becoming an advocate for other children facing medical challenges. At 7 years old, she was already displaying the kind of empathy and leadership that suggested she would follow in both her mother's footsteps in making a positive impact on the world. The girls had started their own small initiative within the foundation, Bubble Buddies, where they trained other children who had survived serious illnesses to become peer supporters for newly diagnosed kids. The program had been so successful that several hospitals had officially incorporated it into their patient support services. On a crisp autumn morning, Maria found herself standing in the lobby of Seattle Children's Hospital, preparing to deliver another training session to their pediatric staff. This hospital held special significance because it was where the foundation had encountered its most challenging case to date. 3 months earlier, they had been contacted by the Nguyen family, whose 8-year-old daughter Lily had been diagnosed with a rare brain tumor that required experimental treatment only available at a few specialized centers. The medical costs were astronomical, even with insurance. But the real challenge was that Lily's parents spoke limited English, had no family support system in the United States, and were struggling to navigate an overwhelmingly complex medical system while dealing with their own terror about their daughter's prognosis. What she found was a family on the verge of complete breakdown, not just from the medical crisis, but from cultural isolation and systemic barriers that made accessing care exponentially more difficult. Lily's father, Duke, worked 3 jobs to support his family and had already exhausted his limited sick leave staying with Lily during her initial treatments. Her mother, Mai, was overwhelmed by medical terminology she couldn't understand and felt helpless to advocate for her daughter. Lily herself had become withdrawn and unresponsive, refusing to eat or participate in activities that might help pass the long hours of treatment. The hospital's standard support services weren't designed for families dealing with cultural differences, and the Nguyens felt lost and alone in ways that went far beyond their daughter's medical needs. Instead of focusing first on the medical or financial aspects of the crisis, she had recognized that the family's primary need was for human connection and cultural understanding. She had contacted the local Vietnamese community center and arranged for volunteer translators who could not only interpret language, but also help bridge cultural differences in medical decision-making. More importantly, she had seen that Lily's withdrawal wasn't just fear of her illness. It was the isolation of being in an environment where no one understood her cultural context or spoke her first language. Maria had arranged for Vietnamese-speaking volunteers to spend time with Lily, reading her stories in Vietnamese and bringing familiar foods that met her dietary restrictions. Within a week, Lily was participating more actively in her treatment. Her appetite had improved, and she had begun to trust the medical staff in ways that directly improved her treatment outcome. Her parents, relieved of the constant stress of translation and cultural navigation, were able to focus their energy on supporting their daughter emotionally. The Hearts and Hope Foundation had the resources to provide intensive, personalized support to individual families, but there were thousands of families facing similar challenges who would never come to their attention. This realization had led to the Foundation's newest initiative, a partnership with medical schools and nursing programs to integrate cultural competency and family systems understanding into healthcare education. Maria had developed a curriculum that combined clinical training with real-world experience, requiring students to spend time with families navigating medical crises and to reflect on how systemic barriers affected patient outcomes. The program had been met with initial resistance from some traditional medical educators who questioned the value of input from someone without formal medical training. But the results spoke for themselves. Students who completed Maria's program showed significantly better communication skills, higher empathy scores, and better long-term patient outcomes in their subsequent clinical work. James Harrison, the chief of pediatrics at Seattle Children's, had initially been one of the skeptics. A brilliant surgeon with decades of experience, he had built his reputation on technical excellence and had little patience for what he saw as touchy-feely approaches to medicine. But after seeing the improvement in patient outcomes among staff who had worked with Maria, he had become one of her strongest supporters. "You taught me that good medicine is about seeing the whole person, the whole family, and understanding that healing happens in relationship, not just in isolation." Maria had worked with a group of nurses, social workers, and resident physicians, using case studies from the Foundation's work to illustrate how small changes in approach could have dramatic impacts on patient care. The Nguyen family's story had been particularly powerful, demonstrating how cultural sensitivity and family-centered care could literally be the difference between life and death. Harrison had asked if she would consider developing a formal partnership with the hospital's medical education program, potentially leading to a permanent position as director of family-centered care education. It would mean relocating to Seattle, but it would also mean the opportunity to influence medical education on a much larger scale. Their life in the city had become deeply rooted, and both Sophia and Emma were thriving in their current schools and social environments. It was Sophia calling from school with excitement barely contained in her voice. Her little brother is in the hospital with pneumonia, and she was so scared because she didn't know how to help him. We gave her a bubble kit and taught her some of the techniques you showed us, and she started crying because she said it was the first time she felt like she could actually do something to help. Emma wants to show you this new bubble technique she invented that makes heart-shaped bubbles. She says they're extra good for scared kids because they show them that someone loves them. Any major change would affect Sophia and Emma, Victoria, and the entire extended family they had created together. Victoria appeared on screen from her home office, Emma visible in the background working on homework at the kitchen island. The chance to influence medical education at that level could impact thousands of future healthcare providers. And you have your businesses, the foundation headquarters, everything you've built here. What if we could find a way to make it work for everyone? The foundation had been expanding geographically anyway, and having a West Coast presence could actually strengthen their reach. The girls were both academically advanced and adaptable, and Seattle had excellent schools. More importantly, Maria realized, the move would represent another step in their ongoing evolution as a family. They had already navigated so many changes together, from Maria's transition from janitor to foundation director, from Victoria's transformation from ruthless executive to compassionate leader, from two separate families dealing with individual crises to one interconnected support system. I keep thinking about something Emma said last week, Victoria shared. She told me that home isn't a place, it's the people who love you. Maybe she's wiser than both of us. By the time they hung up, no final decisions had been made. But Maria felt a familiar sense of possibility that reminded her of that first conversation in the coffee shop when Victoria had offered to change her life. Then, as now, the opportunity represented more than just personal advancement. It was a chance to expand their impact and help more families navigate some of the most challenging experiences life could offer. The next morning, before her flight home, Maria made one more stop at Seattle Children's Hospital. She wanted to check on the Nguyen family and see how Lily was progressing with her treatment. She found Mai in the family lounge, looking tired, but more hopeful than she had during Maria's previous visit. Lily's treatment was progressing well, and the tumor was responding better than doctors had initially expected. More importantly, the family had developed a support network within the hospital that would continue long after their treatment was complete. But more than hope, you gave us understanding that we are not alone. She ran to Maria with a bright smile and presented her with a drawing, a picture of a little girl blowing bubbles, with hearts floating among the soap spheres. Every family they helped, every child who found comfort in their programs, every healthcare provider who learned to see patients as whole human beings rather than just medical cases. All of it traced back to that moment when she had chosen to respond to Emma's fear with compassion rather than walking away. She thought about Carlos and how proud he would be of the woman she had become, the opportunities she had created for Sophia, and the way she had turned their family's tragedy into a source of healing for others. She thought about Victoria and the unlikely friendship that had developed between two women from completely different worlds, united by their shared commitment to their children and their growing understanding that true success was measured in human connections rather than material achievements. Most of all, she thought about Sophia and Emma, and how their friendship had been the catalyst for everything else. Two little girls, brought together by circumstances neither had chosen, who had taught the adults in their lives profound lessons about resilience, love, and the power of authentic connection. When Maria arrived home that evening, she found the house filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Sophia was helping Emma with math homework at the kitchen table while Victoria prepared dinner. A scene so normal and yet so precious, given how extraordinary their path to this moment had been. Did you see lots of scared kids? Did you help them feel better? Maria sat down at the table with both girls, knowing that any decision they made would need to include their voices and perspectives. Over dinner, they talked about Seattle, about the opportunity to influence medical education, about the adventure of starting over in a new place while maintaining the connections and commitments that had become central to their identity as a family. Victoria shared her own thoughts about the potential move, acknowledging both the challenges and the opportunities it would present for her businesses and for the foundation's continued growth. Whatever we decide, Victoria said, looking around the table at the three people who had become her world, we decide together. This family has faced a lot of changes, and we've always been stronger when we face them as a team. She had started as a janitor in a children's hospital, and now she was considering a position that would put her at the forefront of changing how medical professionals were trained to work with children and families. Sophia and Emma had started as children from completely different circumstances, brought together by medical crisis, and had evolved into partners in helping other children navigate their own scary experiences. Victoria had started as a businesswoman focused solely on profit, and had become a leader in corporate social responsibility and family-centered philanthropy. They had all started as separate individuals dealing with their own challenges, and had become a family united by shared values and common purpose. But instead of the familiar version about magic bubbles carrying away fears, Emma had a request. Yes, tell the real story, Mama. The one about how bubbles can change everything. She told them about that night in the hospital hallway, about Emma's fear and Maria's instinct to help, about Victoria watching from behind the glass and recognizing something she needed in her daughter's life. She told them about the coffee shop conversation that had changed everything, about the early days of learning to navigate their new relationship, about Sophia's initial uncertainty and Emma's gradual healing. She told them about the foundation's birth and growth, about all the families they had helped, about the ripple effects of compassion that continued to spread in ways they couldn't always see or measure. As she spoke, Maria realized that she was not just telling a bedtime story, but articulating the narrative that had given meaning to all their lives. It was a story about choosing love over fear, about the courage required to trust in possibilities, and about the way that helping others heal had healed them all in return. "Mama," Sophia said softly, "I think we should go to Seattle. Because there are probably scared kids there who need us, and scared parents who need to learn what Victoria learned, and scared doctors who need to learn what you teach. And besides," Sophia added with a slight smile, "Emma and I can make friends anywhere. But there's only one you, and if you can help more people in Seattle, then that's where we should be." They had cut through all the complexity and uncertainty to focus on what really mattered: the opportunity to help more people, and the confidence that their family was strong enough to handle whatever challenges came their way. Later that evening, as Maria and Victoria sat together in the quiet house, the decision seemed to make itself. If we can help more families, if we can influence more healthcare providers, if we can expand our impact, then we have an obligation to try. Victoria worked with her executive team to restructure her businesses for remote management, while Maria collaborated with Dr. Harrison to develop the curriculum and structure for her new role. The Foundation's transition was more complex, requiring the establishment of a West Coast office and the training of new staff to maintain their East Coast operations. But the process also provided opportunities for growth and expansion that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Sophia and Emma approached the move with the adaptability that had characterized their entire relationship. They researched their new school, planned ways to continue their Bubble Buddies program in Seattle, and even started learning about Pacific Northwest geography and culture. The goodbye process was emotional, but also celebratory. The families they had helped through the Foundation organized a surprise farewell party, with hundreds of people gathering to share stories about how Maria and Victoria's work had touched their lives. Wells presented Maria with a plaque that read, "To Maria Gonzalez, who taught us that the most powerful medicine is often the simplest, the gift of seeing and responding to another person's need with love." Beside her, Sophia and Emma were already planning their first bubble demonstration for their new classmates, while Victoria reviewed documents for the Foundation's Seattle expansion. They were the same people who had found each other in a hospital hallway years earlier, but they were also completely different, shaped by love, challenged by growth, and united by their shared commitment to making the world a little bit kinder for children and families facing their darkest moments. The real magic had been in choosing, again and again, to see possibilities where others saw problems, to respond with love where others might respond with fear, and to believe that small acts of compassion could indeed change the world. One frightened child, one overwhelmed family, one healthcare provider at a time.